Welcome, everyone. It is wonderful to be together with friends from around Philadelphia yearly meeting, but also some in our neighboring regions. And welcome to everyone. And thank you to Central Philadelphia meeting and the library committee for hosting this event and the invitation to join. I am Melinda and I serve Philadelphia yearly meeting, but I also consider a part of that role in my wider ministry being an advocate for children and families in Quaker spaces and in the world. And so Pamela is one of my teachers, and I'm really glad to be here with her and with you. I'm also a parent of 3 children, and so her work with this book really resonates. Pamela Haines, a member of Central Philadelphia meeting, is a parent and grandparent. Her working life has been in support of the childcare workforce, and she has run a family center with her partner since the mid-1980s. She is a Philadelphian all of her adult life, and she has published on the skills of peace building and faith and economics. Her books include Money and Soul, Faith and Practice and the Economy, That Clear and Certain Sound, Finding Solid Ground in Perilous Times, and 2 books of poetry, Alive in This World and Encounters with the Sacred and the Profane. She is passionate about language and parenting, the earth, quilting, and repair of all kinds. So I'm going to add an invitation, which we heard previewed for us by our wonderful tech help person, Nicole, an invitation that during the first part of our time together in this hour, you are welcome to add a question or a comment in the chat. We will lift those up from the chat. And then there will be time for Q&A, for some back and forth and questions for Pamela after we do some readings and have some dialogue with her. So until that part, please put anything you need in the chat, and friends, stay muted. So Pamela, the first question for you rises out of the preface, and I'm just going to read a brief piece from the preface. You wrote, "My Quaker training helped me to center as a parent in seeking for integrity at the heart of my interactions, holding my assumptions and behavior up to the light and responding to the divine spark in those around me. It was a guide along that rocky road that all parents travel, wishing more for our children than we are able to give, full of regrets, all doing our best." So the first question for you here is, in thinking about deciding to publish these reflections, which you had been collecting and keeping for a long time, why now, and who were you imagining reading alongside you as you were writing?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. Being a grandparent really reminds me of those years of very, very intensive parenting. And I wrote the whole time I was a parent. I couldn't help but write, like trying to make sense of my what was going on and trying to see what I was doing with my children in a larger picture. And so now it's alive again in a new way. My children are now 37 and 40, for goodness sake, but lots of grandchildren, plenty of grandchildren. And another thing was having a publisher. The Quaker Quicks imprint has been very, very good to Quakers. So it was kind of like, this could be possible. I would never have imagined that I could write a book that would be published when I was raising my children, but now it feels like it could be possible. And what was the third one? So who do I see? I see anybody who has an understanding that children are full human beings and would wish to see that kind of embodied in the way we are with young people. That's who I would like to see reading along with me. I think it's just that idea about taking people's humanity seriously right from the start. And actually, I wanted to read the very last bit of the preface as my ending of this. So I wanted to acknowledge that I was not an active parent as this book was being published. So my 4-year-old grandson and I lie on our backs in the snow, looking up through the bare branches to the sky above. We've taken a break from play to drink in the immensity and the beauty of the heavens. It is a sacred moment, made all the more precious because I am following his lead. Could I have done more, I wonder, to cultivate these opportunities with my own children? Was I too matter-of-fact, too reluctant to impose my sense of the sacred on them? I have to believe that it was enough.
Thank you. So as I was reading the book and making notes, and I feel like at some point I will go and find where to find this book on FGC Quaker books and put that in the chat. But as I was reading it and taking notes, there were two ways. When I went back and looked, I described it in two ways, what I was reading. And one was that the stories that you share in the book are not advice giving, which anyone who's been to a parenting group or parenting class, that can be a little toxic sometimes, advice giving. But that the way I described it was that they were practical wonderings, that you were kind of wondering about a piece, and yet there was real practicality in it. And also that I wrote at some point that they were like pearls on a string, pearls strung together, that each of these vignettes that you share are so beautiful. So we're going to take some time in the next portion of our time together for Pamela to share some readings from the book with us. And thinking about the first one, which is called On Children's Love and Grief, one of the strongest impressions I had from the book was your encouragement and modeling of deep respect of children. You wrote, this job of parenting calls on deep wells of respect for our own parents. It reaches backwards and forwards for our own parents, for our children, and for ourselves. And sometimes this calls on us to accompany children and take them seriously, I think, which you do. So can you share with us on children's love and grief?
I would love to. It can be scary to see how deeply our children feel. Caring deeply is such a setup for getting hurt. It's so easy to identify with them and want to protect. If I've experienced that kind of hurt myself and never want to experience it again, I can't stand seeing them set themselves up for it. So the obvious protection is to counsel them not to care too much, particularly when they're pouring it out on something that seems silly or insignificant. If they're heartbroken over the breaking of a cheap little plastic toy, I want to explain why it's no big deal. I'm glad to warn them against getting deeply attached to a bug that's bound to die, one that I would have a hard time imagining loving anyway. But if I listen to my words in those silly or insignificant cases, is this what I really want to communicate to my children? Don't hope, don't love, you'll just get hurt. I don't think so. The problem is not in the caring, which is good, but in knowing what to do with the pain, which can be excruciating. For big losses, we're allowed to grieve. When a loved one dies, everyone would agree that it's better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all. We expect the huge outbursts of grief at these times. We even worry if they don't come. We just think that the little losses should be able to be handled differently. But they're basically just the same. It's not the size or value or importance of the object, but the depth of our loving that brings the depth of our grief. So I try to withhold judgment and just encourage that love, knowing that there may be tears down the road. And I try not to be taken aback at the depth of the grief. And so here's the story. When my eldest's little tiny itsy bitsy shrimp died, they weren't as large as houseflies, he was absolutely heartbroken. I remembered all this good thinking, took a deep breath, and decided to take it as seriously as the death of a dearest friend. And he cried and cried. I think it was my attitude that this was real and important and big that allowed him to grieve so fully. Every time he stopped crying, I'd test whether he was really done by calling his attention once more to the fact that the shrimp really were dead and saying what a good lover he was and how much I loved him for that. And he would cry some more. After about half an hour, he seemed to be done, but still wanted to be close to me. So I took him to my meeting, for which I was late by now, still operating on the decision to take this situation totally seriously. He stayed close and sad for a little while, but pretty soon was ready to turn his attention elsewhere. Since then, when the shrimp have come up in conversation, his tone has been very matter-of-fact. And he hasn't stopped giving his heart away to little animals. So something had been right. I'll probably never know how much he was grieving for the shrimp, which I, from my adult perspective, still can't believe he loved that much, and how much he was using my unusually open and accepting attitude to cry about other accumulated griefs that hadn't had a place to come out. But I do know that I want to give my children the chance to grieve about everything that they love and lose, to keep them willing to love as fully and deeply as they know how.
Thank you. So there's so much accompaniment in that story. And along with that accompaniment is really paying attention to what's happening with the child and also ourselves. And many times in the book, you acknowledge the personhood of the adult who's accompanying the child. And I think we're all relieved to know this, there's no perfect parent, but a loving adult person who is seeking to parent. I seek to be a loving adult who is parenting. So our own resilience gets sort of developed alongside our children. And you have a whole section of stories that is on cultivating resilience. So I wonder if you would share one of those, the catching the moment story.
I would be delighted. So this is just a story from start to finish. We were unloading the car after a shopping trip, and the boys got in a fight about who was going to carry what. The younger one wanted the bag with the toys. The older one already had it. I suggested that they switch halfway to the house. At the switching point, the younger one got the bag, but some overflow from it ended up in his brother's hands. He was complaining about the injustice of it all when we reached the steps. But I was out of fresh ideas at that point, and anyhow, the deed was done. I couldn't fathom why he was so upset by a few yards of sidewalk and a plastic bag. But I had a little time, and his brother was immediately and totally engrossed in the new toy. So I took him in my lap, commenting that I noticed how upset he was about the bag, and he burst into tears. It's always easier for me to listen to a child crying than a child complaining. At least I feel like something useful is happening. Even if I don't understand exactly what's going on, I have this image of pressure being released, of pus being drained away from a wound. It just feels healthy. So he cried, and I kept talking to him, trying to get closer to what was really hurting. I called to mind everything I knew about him and used the intensity of his tears to gauge my accuracy. It's like that children's game of guiding someone to a hidden object by telling them how cold or hot they are. You're freezing cold and you're getting warmer. colder, warmer again, warmer, hot. Now you wanted to carry the bag and the toy, tears. It feels like things just don't go your way, more tears. Feels like your big brother gets what he wants and you don't. Big nods and tears. It feels like he's first, like we put him first. Convulsive sobs. Hot. Here is the center of the hurt. I'm taken aback and very sorry that this wonderful child feels that way, even for a minute. Yet I'm sure that this is the right thing for us at this moment. I hold him close and he cries and cries. He doesn't say a word, so I hold up both ends of the conversation. I talk about his part, about how hard it is to be the younger child, and my part, of how wonderful he is and how sorry I am he feels that way and how much I love him. Then he's done. Just as with a scraped knee, after a while, the pain goes away. He's ready to check out his new purchases and moves easily into play with his big brother. Nobody is to blame. Nothing must be corrected. Nothing more needs to be said. Lessons, lessons. I'm always learning and relearning lessons. Things that seem little aren't little. Tears can heal. A wonderful opportunity may be at wait behind any free moment when we can choose to really pay attention.
Thank you. So thanks to Anne. Anne has added a question in the chat, which I'm going to lift up to you, Pamela. And again, friends are welcome to put thoughts or responses to the stories or a question in the chat. And again, for anyone who's just joined, we'll do some more Q&A after some more readings. But the question, Pamela, is any thoughts on dealing with video screen takeover of our children's attention?
Oh my God. Well, I have a story. My first one is I am so grateful to have been parenting before this was a major issue. But it's so funny that you asked that question right now, because just on Thursday, our 7-year-old and 10-year-old were at our house and they were doing a little bit of video. We'd just been to the park and we'd spent a lot of time with the dogs in the park and they'd run and shouted and run. And there's a little video time. And the 7-year-old was out of his mind with frustration. He couldn't make the video work. He was in tears. So I just had my arms around him. I couldn't help him. And I just paid attention while he was wildly upset. And so that's not the common thing that happens with video, but I think that joining in to the extent that we can make a big difference. I think that alone with a screen is far from ideal. So if you've got screens that together, the more you can be together with screens, the more you can be interested in what it is that interests them about it, the more access you have to that part of their lives. And then the more leverage you can have in relationship to the things they're trying to struggle with. Really short answer to a big question that I think our culture is going to need to figure a lot out about still.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for the question, Anne. I have a 15-year-old who, when he plays video games, he wants to tell me about them afterward. And I think that this idea, the accompaniment and the paying attention, I have no idea what he's telling me about, but to be present, to listen, you're wrapping your arms around a frustrated, smaller person. Yeah. So thanks, Anne.
Just real quickly, I went to Blix, where I always find wonderful Christmas presents for my grandkids. You know, that awesome art supply store. And I'm in there and I'm looking around and I just was a wash of sadness came over me. They don't do art anymore. They spend all their time on the screen. So that's a sadness.
Well, we can also invite them to things that we love. And we can love the things that we love really openly without kind of saying that they're better than other things. But I think that there's potential in not just quietly putting away the things we love and assuming that the world has moved on. So that's one thought about art, to bring our love of art into our common space.
Pamela, another one of my favorites for its realness. We just had some real talk about a good question, but one of the stories in the book that is very real is one that you call I Can't Believe. And you capture something that we talked about is really dismissiveness, the reflex to be dismissive of children that can take lots of forms. It's too often our kind of societal response to children and their importance and what they have to say and why they might do the things they do. So could you share with us from the section on cultivating humility, the I Can't Believe story?
I am so glad that I caught this moment and wrote it down, however many years ago that was. Yeah, I can't believe he did that. How often do we say this about our children? I can't believe she stepped right in that mud puddle. I can't believe he won't even try the slide. I can't believe she would be upset by such a little thing. I can't believe they enjoy playing that game. Talk about video screens. It's certainly a common refrain in my parenting, and the dominant emotion is usually despair. This child is acting in ways that make absolutely no sense to me, and I am at a total loss as to how to respond. I was talking with a friend about one of these incidents and found myself hearing the literal meaning of those words. I can't believe he did that. How can I not believe something that I have been witness to? Surely disbelieving a truth about a person can't put me on very solid ground in relationship to them. I've been focusing on how baffling I found his behavior, but it occurred to me in this conversation that the place to start might be better my own disbelief. What if I tried going with the truth of what I'd witnessed instead? This did happen, and it's important that I believe it. From that perspective, everything looks different. Somehow the disbelief had insulated me from the reality of the situation. After all, if someone does something that's beyond belief, then I'm resolved from the responsibility of handling it. I'm justified in my feeling that it's out of my control, hopeless, impossible, whatever. Saying that I do believe it feels like a first step forward in reclaiming my power in the situation. If I acknowledge that reality, then I can start thinking about it. If he really did do it, then something must have caused him to do it. If I have a hard time believing it, there must be something that's giving me a hard time. This new framework doesn't automatically provide answers, but at least it faces me in the right direction with the right questions in mind. I might not want to know about it. I might not want to acknowledge that he's that upset or that angry or that scared or that different from me, but at least I'm dealing with what is. I'm on solid ground. Now I can take the next step. Since this is really true, then it will be useful if and from the completion of that thought, a further step is likely to emerge. After I'd started writing this, I was telling someone about an awkward little encounter and heard myself saying, I can't believe I did that. This time the dominant emotion was shame. What a gift to have this framework to fall back on. You did it. There was some reason, and there's a next step you can take. Thank goodness for what I learned as a parent.
Thank you.
You know, I realized just in writing, I use the he pronouns all the time. It's because I'm surrounded by boys, all my grandchildren. So that's the reason you hear a lot of he's in these stories.
There's another question in the chat from Abdrahim. What literary form do you see this work belonging to? If you were to put it on a shelf, I would add, like, where do you think it goes? Or what multiple places might it be in a library on the shelves?
Well, there's like where on the shelves and what literary form. It's a reflective essay form. Well, I think it belongs in the parenting. I mean, I think that people are most likely to pick it up on the parenting shelf. I don't know if it would be distinguished from the kind of the instructional or whatever other books that I thoughtfully did not write. I don't know. I guess it could be like spirituality in relation to our children.
Mm-hmm. Well, it felt to me as a Quaker parent and someone who thinks about and talks about children's spiritual lives in my work, that the topic was kind of infused throughout the book. But the story Peekaboo really resonated with me for this reason, because you describe why Peekaboo is a favorite game and what kinds of questions we're asking when we play it. And my note in the margin of was that that's often what we're doing in relationship with God, is playing kind of this game of peekaboo. And the children's spiritual lives are like that, in that they are ever present, but sometimes more fully expressed, and sometimes we might not be seeing them all the time. I told Pamela I was on a walk once with, I think, a child who was 5, who said to me out of the blue, "Mommy, sometimes I wonder why I'm here and why I was born and what I'm meant to do and what will happen when I die." And then he ran off to play, and that was the end of the conversation. So, it's, again, ever present and yet not always clear. So I wonder if you would share Peekaboo with us.
Yes. Peekaboo. How often have we played that game with our children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, neighborhood children, babies that we don't even know at checkout lines in the grocery store or on the bus? Just a little parentheses here. A friend with a young child whom I haven't gotten to know very well because of the pandemic was over, and she just started playing peekaboo with the cracker box in her face at the kitchen table. And so we just had ourselves a game of peekaboo. It may be called different things in different places, but its theme is universal and eternal. I must have played peekaboo 1,000 times before I ever noticed what the game was really about. It happened at a workshop when I had just met somebody new. We liked each other right away, found a topic of mutual interest without difficulty, and were chatting away happily. Then came a lull in the conversation, one of those pregnant pauses when our eyes met, when we both had to notice that the other one was really there. How excruciatingly embarrassing. Luckily, we were both on the same wavelength. We looked, laughed, hid our faces again, looked again, and laughed and laughed. It was a classic game of peekaboo. And no wonder the game is a classic. It's all about the most basic questions in human relationships. Are you there? Are you really there? Will you be there next time? Do you see me? Do you really see me? Are you pleased to see me? Will you be pleased to see me next time? Not only do you get a chance to ask all these important questions, you get to laugh and laugh as the answers come back. A great and wonderful string of unqualified yeses. Ultimately, peekaboo is a game about noticing, about being there. To be played successfully, both players must have their full attention on the game. This, I think, may be the greatest attraction. Any child who is playing peekaboo has secured another person's undivided, positive attention, one of the most scarce and valuable resources of all. No wonder children love the game. And no wonder we adults find it such an embarrassing game to play with each other. In the course of our childhood and growing up, we've gotten enough no's in response to all those questions that they often seem like pretty scary ones to ask. I think of all the hundreds of times I've turned my children down. No, other things are more important. No, I don't have time for you. No, I would rather not be bothered. No, you'll have to manage by yourself. It's not surprising that we found lots of ways to avoid risking those no's. We don't ask. We go off by ourselves. We lower our eyes. We change the subject. We deflect with a joke. We discover important work that needs to be done. But peekaboo is a great game. I have a new appreciation of why children want to play, and I'd like to see it played even more, with all sorts of variations for different ages. What if every child riding on a bus, every child waiting in line, got to play peekaboo? What if that were just the beginning? The more yeses we can get to those basic questions, and the more we can laugh in wonder and delight at all the yeses, the better off all of us will be.
We'll come back to delighting in the yeses. I love that phrase, delighting in the yeses. There is another question in the chat, and friend, I'm going to ask if you want to go ahead and unmute and ask this question yourself. Abderrahim, do you want to do that? Unmute and ask this question that you've put in the chat. I don't know if you're on, you'll need to unmute. Do you want me to go? I can read it from the chat too. So Pamela, the question, you're probably reading it yourself. What do you see it?
Yes.
Right.
So what about complying with children's commands and the effects on their sense of responsibility that we would want them to acquire as they're growing up? I don't think there's a conflict. I think that children who have access to our attention will go on to grow up and be responsible. I think, I'll tell a story. When my children were growing up, I didn't send them off to do tasks by themselves. I didn't say, now is your night to clean the whatever. We did stuff together. So we did the work together. And then I discovered my 16-year-old was really great at folding laundry. He had just picked up the skill of folding laundry and wanted to be a competent person who was able to fold laundry and didn't feel like it was punitive to do that work. So I think that it's safe. I think it's safe. I guess this is my answer, to pay way more of that kind of unqualified positive attention than most of us either have time to do or it's worrying about spoiling children. I think that loving them open-heartedly just does not spoil them, and giving them opportunities to joining them as they try things doesn't spoil them. So that this is I think there's a lot of space to pay attention and not worry about them becoming responsible. That's a short answer. It's a really big question, but there's a bit of an answer there.
Pamela, the next one I'm going to ask you to read, I think it connects into this. The story is from the Cultivating Discernment section. It's called Negotiating Cool. We're sort of thinking about bigger kids. Adolescence is really big work. I remember being told that children that I taught middle school, that from 6th to 8th grade is the biggest period of growth, that other than like your first year from newborn to 1-year-old, that early adolescence is just this period of incredible growth. And someone once told me that our job as parents of teens is to be the side of the pool, to be the wall of the pool. And that steady presence, you talk a lot about presence, right? About presence in these stories, that our children they need to push off from us and swim out, but they need to know the wall is there to come back to hold on to rest in us, rest with us. And that requires some discernment and being willing to stay open. So I wonder if you'll read Negotiating Cool for us.
Yeah, I realized that I didn't write that many things about teenagers, but this one I did. My little boy never used to be cool. He used to snuggle up for bedtime stories, wrestle and laugh with me, want me close by. I never really thought about teenage years that much. I guess part of me had the idea that my child wouldn't change. His voice dropped and he started to grow like a weed, and still he was my same sweet guy. This was going to be easy, I thought. Then he got cool. All of a sudden, snuggles were out. Hugs and kisses were deflected with bored disinterest. He didn't want my help with little things I'd always helped him with before. My feelings were definitely hurt. Had I been totally written out of his life, virtually from 1 month to the next? Thank goodness for friends who had already struggled through this stage. Left to myself, I would have taken all those messages at their face value, decided that he really didn't want me anymore, and quietly retreated, making no more moves in his direction, just hoping that someday he might change his mind and want me again. But one friend in particular had taken on the mission of helping parents with teenagers. Her voice rang in my ears. You get to be close forever. They still want you. They want to be close. They won't show it in the same way, but they're counting on you to not give up. You get to be close forever. The signs did not look promising, but I clung to the hope that she was right. I decided to not give up. I made tentative little advances in his direction. Some were accepted with what looked like bored indifference. Some were deflected with more of the same. My feelings were hurt all over again. I cried with my husband. It would have been so much easier to stop trying, except that the price was losing my precious son even more finally. And there was something about my friend's voice that rang true. They're counting on you not to give up. I could imagine someone slipping into a suit of cool and seeing if they could fool their loved ones. Hey, can you still recognize me in this outfit? Bet you can't. In a way, it was like a test. Will you not get confused even if I try to confuse you? Will you remember who I really am underneath, even though I don't let any of that part show? I don't quite understand the drive to play that game, but I sure know the right answer. All of a sudden, I'm reminded of our toddlers' transparently simple games of hide and seek and peekaboo. Even though I'm hidden, can you still find me? There can be only one right answer. Yes. Yes, I can find you. Yes, you can count on me. When I remember all of that, I can remember to be more bold in showing my love, not putting out tentative little feelers, then dropping back and waiting for a totally positive response before making another move, but acting like someone who is confident of loving and being loved and not worrying about what the response will be. It doesn't often look sweet these days. We're more likely to have laughing, funny insult trading, sparring matches than cozy snuggles. But when I boldly assume my welcome, he almost always responds. And to see his face open up in laughter as we play, to see that facade of cool drop away, if only for a moment, is all that I need to keep going. I still have my son. And I would say I still have him as a 40-year-old, which is pretty cool. Cool.
Cool in new ways.
Yeah.
Mutual coolness. So there was something about joy. We said it a little bit ago, and there is a lovely story about mud and mess and delight and permission and accompaniment, where you and a fellow parent really support each other in facilitating joy. And I'm not sure, I'm not sure if the two of you even talk to each other at all, or if it's just muted in the retelling.
We mostly just looked at each other almost entirely in this story. There wasn't a lot of big conversation going on.
Well, yep. Leaning on each other, it's called.
Another parent and I were on our way to the car after an outdoor adventure with the children, then ages 5, 4, 4, and 2, when they discovered a big, deep, and irresistibly inviting mud puddle. I had noticed it on the way out and had carefully not called attention to it, casually steering them in a slightly different direction. Having found it, they couldn't resist trying it out just a little bit and immediately checked us out to see what our response was going to be. Now, I try to be relaxed about things like water and dirt, guessing that the pleasure they give the children probably outweighs my desire for cleanliness and order. And I knew that this other dad felt the same, but this was a very big and very muddy puddle. I looked at him and he looked at me. If I'd been alone, I know I would have hustled the children away from all that dirt and water and gotten them safely into the car as soon as possible. If he had been alone, he probably would have done the same. But we had each other. Taking a middle course, we suggested that they wade a little, but try not to get very wet. This invitation to restraint, however, was doomed from the start, as I think we both had secretly known it would be. Small children, faced with a big puddle and given a little permission, are not likely to exercise moderation. They were up to their ankles, then the tops of their boots, then above. Once it had gotten that far, there was no logical limit. Soon they were up to their knees. Then, inevitably, one of them fell all the way in. He squealed with pure pleasure and invited the others to join him. They raced and slid and splashed and fell and howled with delight. My friend and I kept looking at each other as the children got wetter and muddier and happier, both of us counting on the other's support to get us through. Finally, we came to an ending place. I don't remember it clearly, but I think it started to rain. Though they couldn't have gotten any wetter, we had managed to stay relatively dry up until then. We stripped the children down to their underwear and popped them into the car, still squealing with delight. Back home, we streaked into the house, headed straight for the bathtub and dry clothes, then made warm drinks and biscuits and had tea by candlelight, the children's idea. It was a wonderful ending for all of us to one of the best and most memorable adventures ever. There were 2 lessons here for me. As parents, we can be thoughtful about choosing the time and place for messy play, minimizing the hardship on us while not detracting from our children's pleasure. And we can be of use to each other, just having another adult there made everything seem more possible. I felt stronger, more resilient, more flexible, more tolerant, more loving even. I was leaning on my friend. He was leaning on me. And rather than the drag of dependence, both of us felt only the great gift of support.
Mm. Nice. That accompaniment with our children, but also with one another. There are a couple questions in the chat. I know we have, I think, one more story you want to share. One of the questions is whether you can list 2 or 3 major mistakes parents make raising children, and that might feel antithetical to what you share in the book. Thinking about the message and ideals of the book, could you say 2 or 3 things that might be mistakes?
Mistakes. I think separation. I think there's a mistake that parents, I need to separate myself out as the big person or the authority or the one who's right. That I need to maintain a position that's separate in order to have the authority that I need. I think it's a pretty totally understandable, of course, but I think that we lose out on both on connection and on real influence of our children, I think, if we try to parent from a distance. I think that not prioritizing getting support and being self-reflective is like if you can't learn from what's going on in parenting, if you don't have a space where you can notice and reflect and imagine, that's just, it seems like it's then you end up just having to kind of manage one situation after another. I think another one is having a persona, a kind of it's an adult persona that doesn't include fun. I think that our children just gain so much from seeing us as people who have fun, and showing ourselves to our children more fully. I guess that is showing our humanness to our children, not and particularly including the things that we love and the things that bring us joy. Somehow being open to those. So that's a couple of thoughts that come to my mind.
Thanks. There's another question that I'm going to invite you to go ahead and read, Pamela, in the chat, because it's a story in and of itself. Claire's shared a story of a young person and seeking to understand where they might be coming from with their gifting.
Oh, please help me understand what it means that the goth kid next door gifted me with animal skeletal bones in my mailbox. I took this act as an ultimate gift to me. She will still not acknowledge me in public and has gotten her mother to ask me if her daughter might hunt for animal bones in my yard. I do believe this odd teen is quite extraordinary, even though I don't understand her at all. Oh my gosh, talk about a cool suit. This teen has constructed a persona that she's hiding behind, but looking for contact through it. And she's looking for contact with you. I'm so glad that you recognize it as a gift, that she wants something and she's found a way to reach out and make a little connection. So it's hard being a teenager these days. I mean, it's always hard being a teenager, and now you're a teenager as well as being in this present moment. I think you're in great shape, that you see it as a gift. You see her as extraordinary. There's a classic peekaboo thing going on here. And I think you know exactly what to do. Yeah, scares me a bit, but quickly shines when she looks at me. She's checking it out. We got peekaboo going on here. So maybe find another adult that can help you just look at what scares you so that you can feel those scared feelings. So you don't have to just be kind of pushing them down. And then go for that shining. What a gift. That's such a great story. Thanks for sharing it.
Thanks, Claire. Pamela, I know there's one more that you really wanted to share with us from the book. It's Sounding Reasonable and Real Justice. And I just want to invite you to tell us more after lifting up what I think is just a great sentence in this one that we're going to hear. But tone of voice has nothing to do with justice.
Well, this section, Cultivating a Wider View, tries to put parenting in a larger context. And there's just so much that goes on with children that reflects what's going on in the wider world or illuminates. And so I just wanted to read this one from that section, Sounding Reasonable and Real Justice. Another story. This is a cousin story. A well-behaved young lady of 9 was playing with her younger brother and cousins. She had choreographed a game of tag, which everyone was very enthusiastic about, and announced that the youngest 2 would be it. Her brother exploded in frustration. He stomped and cried and yelled that it was unfair. She was gently and firmly insistent. He continued to scream refusal. After a few minutes, she came in to announce sadly that they couldn't play the game because her brother just wouldn't cooperate. On the face of it, she was right. The game wasn't working, and her brother certainly looked and acted like the problem. But having a passionate and sturdy little second child of my own, I was aware of another possible point of view. The older sibling, as usual, was making the rules. Once again, her brother was expected to run his fat little legs off in vain, trying to tag the older ones. He couldn't win an argument about it because arguing was another thing she was better at. The only choices he saw were to give up and do it her way, once again, or to resist. And the only way he knew how to resist was to yell. If only he'd been able to walk calmly into the room and announce sorrowfully that the game was ruined for everyone because she refused to be it. But he couldn't. So she got an incredible edge in winning the adults to her point of view because she sounded like an adult. She was calm and reasonable. She stated the situation in clear, logical form. Adults like being around people who sound calm and reasonable. We're in sympathy with them just on the basis of their tone of voice. But a tone of voice has nothing to do with justice. In this case, his grievance was exactly the same as hers. It should have carried exactly the same weight. In another situation, it might have been much stronger, no matter how deeply obscured by tears, rage, and flailing of arms. It seems universally true that those with more power at their command, fuller use of language, longer legs, access to resources, or the ear of authorities, are the ones who can most afford to sound reasonable. They have played the larger role in shaping the status quo, establishing ground rules that work to their benefit, and being seen as upholders of rules and order. It's the ones with the less power, less sophisticated language, shorter legs, less access to resource and decision-making, who end up raging and railing against the status quo. This dynamic plays out on many levels. Younger children in relation to older ones, all children in relation to adults, marginal members of the society in relation to the establishment. Of course, loudness and rage are no automatic indication of having justice on one side. But The next time I hear a reasonable sounding adult position in conflict with an incoherent bundle of protest, I hope I won't jump to any conclusions. I hope I remember that little brother who had such a legitimate complaint and listen very carefully to the side that's harder to hear.
Thank you, Pamela.